Okay, so a few people asked me, and I haven't given my thoughts on it, but I think it'd be like a good, interesting thing to talk about just for a sec, because I have some thoughts. But so the UFC fight was this weekend. It was this past weekend, and the weekend before was the boxing card that everyone was talking about, the Jake Paul fight. And I wanted to talk about that because there were some interesting things that I thought about. And it's probably not what you think. Like, I don't really have opinions about, like, I don't watch Jake Paul. I don't really have too many opinions. I just don't really pay attention. But what I thought was interesting was, a lot of you know that I've been a UFC fan for a long time. And even back way in the early days of the UFC, I was like supporting and watching, and I was even doing like, I had my radio show and stuff. So I've been into the sport of MMA for a long time. And in the recent years, I've watched less of the sport. And it's been on purpose, and I've talked about it, but if you can cut through maybe some of, okay, what was the Triller? Was that the name of the fight production company that put on the Jake Paul card? Triller, something like that? Yeah. So I just want to talk about that. So they put this event on, right? And they have headlining the event is Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Everyone who's buying the PPV pay-per-view knows who Jake Paul is. Maybe not everyone knows who Ben Askren is. Not a boxer, MMA fighter. It became pretty clear after what happened. He showed up for a paycheck, and good for him. But aside from that, they had this event was like, it was all over the place, right? But it was kind of fun to watch. Like, they had so many big names there. If you watch it, they had musical performances. Like, it was more musical performances that I have seen on like the Super Bowl, the Grammys. I mean, like, I haven't watched an event with this many musical performances. I'm not saying they were better or worse. They were just like big names performing tons of musical performances. They had Snoop Dogg. They had Justin Bieber. They had, hold on one sec. Doja Cat, Sweetie, Ice Cube, E40, Too Short, Major Lazer, all performed. So they had these massive artists perform leading up to the fight. And not performing, but they had a bunch of celebrities there doing the hosting and the commentating. They had Pete Davidson. They had Mario Lopez. They had the D'Amelios. They had Snoop. He was on the panel of commentators. Michael Buffer, world-renowned announcer from the boxing world. Al Bernstein, Ric Flair. I mean, huge, big, legendary names all over the place, right? And then they have this fight that, like, everyone says, oh, that fight was, what a joke. What I found interesting was the event didn't take itself seriously, but it almost like put a blueprint down that you don't have to be the UFC to host a big combat sports event. And not only that, but you don't have to be the UFC to attract potentially world-class athletes to fight on your card. Because I'll tell you one thing, everyone who was a part of this event, from what the research I've done about the riders that these performers require and the fighters that were on the card and the purses that were leaked, people got fucking paid. They got paid. You can say what you want about the event. You can say what you want about Jake Paul. That's fine. I'm not talking about that. But you have these people who showed up for an event and they got paid. They got money. The UFC has been losing me and a lot of people, I think, as a fan for a long time because they just don't pay their fighters. Their fighters aren't even employees. They're contractors. So you have this organization that brings in the UFC, that brings in pay-per-view money, Similar to what the Jake Paul fight brings in, which is a lot of money, like millions and millions of dollars from all the pay-per-view buys, every single card. And you have these nonstop stories coming out about the fighters not being able to pay their trainers, being able to pay for their fight camps, being able to afford travel. I mean, it's like ridiculous. You have these fighters in this extreme sport fighting on a card that's $70 per person who wants to watch it, and the UFC is pocketing most of it. So that makes it hard to support a company like that, you know? And so coming from that line of thinking, you watch Triller come out with this card that everyone calls a big clown show because it's not conventional and it's not this like pro sports vibe. It's very like, you have this panel of like celebrities getting high, talking about how they were all zooted and commentating the fights like you're hearing your uncles talk in the other room while they're watching a fight. Like nothing about it was professional, but it was kind of fun to watch. And who says it needs to be professional? You know what I mean? Like if you have an event like that with all those big names and the budget that gets distributed to all the big names, people are going to come want to fight on your cards. And I'm not saying, you know, Triller or Jake Paul is the future and it has to be the future for fight cards or boxing cards or anything like that. But it did set an example that I think sort of democratizes live events like this, right? If they can do it, why can't anyone do this? Why can't people put on this entertaining event, however serious they want to take it, and book a bunch of big fighters on it and pay everyone really well and sell it on pay-per-view? Like, who's to say you can't do that? You know what I mean? And I kind of think that that's what caught my eye. And also, I'm not gonna lie, dude, I had fun watching. Like, the musical performances were fun, the prelim fights were interesting, and I was like kind of enjoying listening to the commentators like all be idiots and just get high. It's like, it was really funny. I've never had that experience before. It just sucks that for the longest time everyone has watched the UFC and the UFC has like kind of held the top spot because they're a monopoly, you know? But they're not treating their fighters well, and so that sucks. So I just thought about that because like everyone who's asked me about the Jake Paul fight, they were like, wow, what a shit show. Like, okay. But like if you take a step back and you look at it, everyone who showed up there got paid. Everyone. You have Frank Mir. He's a former UFC heavyweight champion. He showed up and boxed. That was his professional boxing debut. And he lost to a younger, better fighter. But I guarantee you that boy got paid. And Ben Askren even told you, he made off of just his fight purse, which is implying he made other money from sponsors and whatever else, but off of just Ben Askren's fight purse, the guy who lost to Jake Paul, he made more than his last combined 9 fights in Bellator. Mind you, he was the champion. So you have this MMA world champion, fights 9 times and doesn't make what he makes in one night of what he did at the Jake Paul fight. Just think about that for a second. I mean, he's like, you talk about like world-class athletes. You have the best baseball players and football players and basketball players getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars in contract money. And it's all public because they're the best in the world. Why do UFC fighters have to settle for $20,000, $15,000, $13,000 per fight? It's because the UFC has control over the space and they choose to be shitty to they're not even employees. I can't even call them employees. They're contractors. The UFC does not employ their fighters. They contract them. And they do that so they don't have to worry about letting them go whenever the fuck they want and paying them whatever the fuck they want. And there's no benefits. What? It's crazy. It's fucking crazy. So the reason why I loved what happened on Triller is because it set a blueprint for the potential for a company to come along and attract really top tier MMA fighters to show up and get a real paycheck. And I mean, there's nothing better than supporting your favorite fighter or athlete, knowing that they showed up and they got paid really well. And it's the weirdest feeling when you support your favorite fighter or athlete and you watch them show up and you hear stories about how they didn't get paid well or enough to pay their trainers. Like, that's the weirdest feeling ever. What do you do with that? I never knew the UFC was like that. And you know what's fucked, Mayor, is a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. You would have to do some research to know that the fighters aren't getting paid very well and people are leaving the UFC to go get better paychecks. Because the UFC puts out this image that they're the Major League Baseball of MMA. They have this professional, they're on ESPN, you know what I mean? And they advertise how well they pay their one percenters, like the Conor McGregors. You know what I mean? Sure, they'll advertise that and they'll promote that, but like, what about literally everyone else? They don't. The UFC has been taking advantage of their fighters forever, for a long ass time. But what does a monopoly do? They don't give you a choice. You're forced to either support them or not. And when you don't support the UFC, you're missing out on a lot of the best MMA fights going on in today's world. Yeah, Lexi, it's pathetic. It's like, and it's also like we're learning right now, like common knowledge is that the UFC is just this like beacon of professionalism, which they're not. They have a monopoly on the sport and they do what they want with their money, which is they're greedy with it, and they don't even hire their fighters as employees. They're contractors, dude. That's so silly. And so I hate having to buy a UFC card. I'll admit it. I bought the fight this weekend and I don't buy fights like very much anymore. If Conor's fighting, I'll buy it. If there's a few championship fights on a card, I'll buy it, maybe. And there just so happen to be some really good fights on this card this last weekend, which is, it's cool, but it's also like, I don't know. So I think if you can look past what a lot of people are calling like a circus and like unconventional in the Triller Jake Paul fight, you see something that could potentially be really exciting in the space, which is a democratization of live combat sports events, which opens the door for a lot of people to get paid, a lot of entertaining cards to come, and the UFC to have to do something about how they're treating their people. Anyway, those are my thoughts. All right, I had a lot of thoughts and I haven't talked about them, about all this. What is stopping companies like Triller from hosting more events? Nothing. That's the craziest thing. That's the part that is crazy. All you need is to get sanctioned by the athletic commission in whatever state you're holding the event in. You know, and you cover your bases as far as like medical staff and cross your T's, dot your I's, and then anyone can have an event. As far as I know. I mean, they hosted a pro boxing event. The lack of reputation, but in today's day and age, who needs brand reputation when you have one person, Jake Paul, with his influence selling that many pay-per-views, right? Or like think of any one person who has influence online in any way, shape, or form. They could do the same thing. Why not? You don't need a marketing team. You don't need a billboard. You have the internet. Everything is democratized. Like, so is the event space now. And I just like, what I hope from this is that more people do hold events that turn out to be fun and crazy and can pay fighters, but also safe. And or the UFC looks at this and takes a really good hard look at how they're running things and changes how they're treating their employees or lack thereof. And again, this has nothing to do with my thoughts on Jake Paul or any of the people, you know, involved. Like, that was sort of just background noise. I didn't really care about that. It was more just like the fact that I paid for a pay-per-view and that's what I got. And it made me think about it. I don't know what would happen if you had like 20 of the top UFC fighters in each division all come together and say, hey, we're going to start our own thing. And we're going to team up with these people who have a following, who want to host this event. And we're going to create this new league. Imagine that. Imagine how crazy that would be. That would flip the whole industry on its head. What is a pay-per-view? It's pay per view. It's not paper. But it's basically a paid event that you buy to watch on TV or on your devices. Like, back in the day, you'd have to call someone and be like, hey, I'd like to buy this, and you'd give them your credit card number. Today, it's like on every app you can, like on the ESPN Plus app. Yeah, you're paying per view is essentially what PPV is. I know Bellator treats their fighters better, and I have been supporting Bellator for a long time for that reason. But you still have this dilemma where the UFC is the household name. So fighters want to be in the UFC at all costs, even if they know they're taking a bath as far as like paychecks. So unless absolutely forced to go to the other organizations like Bellator and stuff, people want to be in the UFC. They want that brand recognition. They want to say, I'm the UFC champion. But getting there is brutal, because unless you're Conor McGregor or you're a champion fighter or championship caliber fighter fighting for a title, whatever, you're treated like, do something crazy or else you're fired. And even if you win, like, here's like $9,000. And these people train for months and they have to pay their trainers. I mean, there is some shit. If you look up UFC fighter pay problems, there's a lot out there that's really, really upsetting. And it makes it hard to support the organization in sport, let alone buy their cards. Like, ooh, feels bad. Anyway, I just wanted to... Those are my thoughts. A lot of people are asking what I thought. That's what I think about it. The end.